right. This is an introduction to a discussion that I had with someone called EFR about the revolutionary phenotype. So this is really a rehash of things that I talked about with Fathom, and it's also a rehash of my debunking of the revolutionary phenotype. So if you're interested in the most concise and well-presented version of that, you should just go listen to the original video, and I will put a link to that. It's called Debunking the Revolutionary Phenotype. So this is really, EFR is trying to rehabilitate the theory, or kind of save it, I guess, from my criticisms. And in my opinion, he does not do that at all. Not to insult him. He's a smart guy. He gave it a good faith effort. But I think you'll see, if you listen to this, that there really isn't any refutation of my criticisms contained within it. Now, the reason I'm making this little intro is because there are some possible confusions in the discussion that I want to address to avoid creating confusion in the listener. One of them is my fault, and maybe I'll address that first. I use the term centriole quite a few times, and I'm not really using it correctly. See, what I want to refer to is the entire structure that regulates cell division, which consists of the centriole, but also the spindle fibers, the centromeres, the structure of the chromosomes. This whole shebang, like the whole way that cell division is carried out, is controlled by these fibers that line up the chromosomes, pull them to opposite poles of the cell. The centriole is kind of the guiding, the organizing node, I guess you could say, or mechanism. The centriole replicates itself, and then the two centrioles then organize the process of cell division. And so it's quite complicated, and I use the term centriole to refer to that whole thing when really it just refers to that little organizing structure, not the whole thing. So I wanted to clear that up. There is no general term for that as far as I know, and I'm not a cell biologist, so if there is, somebody let me know. But there is this other type of inheritance called structural inheritance to, I guess, distinguish it from DNA inheritance or nucleotide or genetic, inheritance. And it does play a role in evolution, and it actually plays a pretty important role in evolution. And it can consist of things like chromosomes merging, chromosomes splitting. And there are other types of structural mutations that have played an important role in evolution, such as probably a kind of symbiotic, what's the right word for this? A kind of fusion of different cells to form a composite cell. Like, for example, you have mitochondria that replicate as a unit. They have their own DNA. So, and nobody knows for sure, but you can imagine that this happened by a larger cell incorporating a smaller cell that was good at doing that one job, and eventually those two cells kind of became a composite structure that replicated as a unit, right? And now that didn't occur by mutation to a nucleotide sequence. It's not, in the DNA, it's in the structure. It's in the fact that the mitochondria are inside the cell and that they replicate as individual units, but then they are copied when the cell divides. Okay, now there are a couple of possible confusions that I think EFR is making, and they might confuse people listening, so I'm going to bring them up. And this is not to, bash him or whatever. He does not have an education in biology, but he is learning about this stuff on his own, and I think he may have picked up some misleading ideas. So, like, when I was listening to this, there were a couple of times where he seemed to not understand certain things, and so I just want to point that out in advance so people won't be confused by it. On a couple of occasions, he talks about selecting a whole genome or something like that to refer to something like an organism dying. So he's confusing selection with an organism living or dying, or an organism succeeding or failing to reproduce. He's confusing the individual instance of, you could say, of DNA being replicated or not, or of an organism reproducing or not, with selection. And this might be related to another confusion that I think is often made in biology between the general and the specific gene. So genes exist both in the abstract and in the specific. A gene could be said to exist in your body, like you have a copy of this allele of this gene or something. You have this sequence of nucleotides in you. But then you can also talk about the gene as an abstract entity that consists only of information and exists in many individuals simultaneously. And so its existence through time and space is distributed across potentially millions or billions or trillions of individuals. Okay, so then that's the abstract gene, and then there's the specific gene, which refers to an instance of the abstract gene in a single individual organism. And I think people sometimes mix those up. And I think maybe he's mixing them up there. That's part of that. I don't know for sure, but he said that a couple of times. It doesn't make sense. You can't talk about like an individual reproducing or not reproducing, living or dying, whatever, as selection. Selection acts on a population. And it acts at the level of the abstract gene, not the specific gene. Now, of course, it takes place at the level of individuals because it is the individuals who live or die who reproduce or don't reproduce. So it takes place at the individual level. The individual is the unit at which selection operates, but it's not the unit on which selection operates. Selection selects traits or genes or whatever, whatever way you want to look at it. You can look at it phenotypically and say that it selects traits, or you can look at it in terms of genes, and then you can say it selects this gene over that gene. And when you're talking about it that way, you're talking about an entire population and changing frequencies of alleles or frequencies of genes or frequencies of traits within that population. Okay, so normally when we talk about selection, we are talking about it acting at that population level or that abstract level. Like you might say that, a long beak was selected for. Okay, that means that in that population that you're talking about, beaks were getting longer on average. And that's the effect of many, many, many different individual lives being lived, many individual birds living and dying, some of them having more offspring, some of them having fewer offspring. The net effect is that the beaks in that population got longer on average over, 100 years or something. Okay, so that's what selection is, and it doesn't make sense to talk about like an individual dying or something like that as selecting against a genome. And so I think that's where there's a confusion. Then there was another thing that had to do with cell division, which I think, I don't know what his knowledge of this is, but it sounded like he didn't understand that both meiosis and mitosis destroy the original cell. So it's not like multicellular organisms that produce offspring. Like I have children, but I still exist. I didn't divide into my children, right? But when cells reproduce, they reproduce by cell division. And there are different forms of that. There is bacterial, the bacterial form, which is simple cell division. Well, it's not even that simple. There was probably a simpler form earlier on. But anyway, bacteria are fairly simple, so they kind of just split. Like each side gets a copy of the DNA and other constituents of the cell, other things that are in the cell. Each gets its own membrane, cytoplasm, and so on. In eukaryotic life forms, there are two types of cell division, mitosis and meiosis. In mitosis, a single diploid cell splits into two diploid cells. So it doubles up its chromosomes and then it splits so that each new cell has the complete set of chromosomes and other cellular structures. So in mitosis, the parent cell divides into two child cells, but by doing so, the parent cell is destroyed. Now, you could have mitosis for haploid cells, actually, but that's kind of a special case. And then in meiosis, you have a single diploid cell splitting into 4 haploid cells by 2 divisions. So it produces 4 haploid cells, and then 2 haploid cells can merge to form a new diploid cell, which is a zygote, which is a new organism, or the beginning of a new organism. Like you came from 2 haploid cells, a sperm and an egg, fusing to form a zygote. Okay, so those are the 2 types of cell division that occur in eukaryotic cells, and in both cases the parent cell is replaced. So it does not produce offspring, it becomes its offspring, right? It is divided into its offspring. So I just from his language when we were talking about certain things, it seemed like he didn't understand that. JF has this theory, and I never really read it, so I'm not going to be saying that that it's definitely wrong, because I didn't actually read it carefully enough to know if it's definitely wrong. But he said something like, the diploid queen cell creates haploid helper cells. And I didn't bother reading it because it just sounded crazy to me. I just thought, this is stupid, whatever, I'm tired of this shit. Let's go on to the end of this book. But it really doesn't make sense, because diploid cells don't create offspring, whether they're haploid or diploid, in the way that we could create offspring. Like you could say, well, a queen bee creates worker bees to be helpers. Now, worker bees are actually diploid, not haploid, but whatever. But it does not make sense to talk about a diploid cell creating haploid offspring to help it, because in order to create the haploid offspring, it would have to destroy itself. So there'd be no diploid cell left behind to be helped by these helpers. So I don't know, maybe there's a more complicated explanation of this, but just on the face of it, it sounds crazy, right? So I just said, fuck it, I'm not going to read this bullshit. So I skipped through it, and I don't know. Maybe there was something more complicated, like maybe the diploid cell first does a bunch of cell divisions to create a bunch of other diploid cells, and then they undergo meiosis to produce haploid helper cells or something. I don't know, and I don't really care, because it all just seems crazy to me, and I don't think it's worth wasting my time on. But anyway, I think there was some confusion about that when we were talking about that. And then, what else is there that might be confusing? Well, I think at the very end, there was this thing where I was saying, what is it a theory of? And EFR seemed to get puzzled by this question. Like, he seemed to be saying, well, the theory is just describing a way that a new genetic medium can replace an existing genetic medium. Well, if it's just the description of something that could happen, then it is not really that interesting. It's much more interesting if it's something that always happens, or if X happens, then Y will happen. And JF uses the theory to make that kind of prediction, right? He uses the theory to claim that, well, if we start using genetic engineering, we're almost inevitably going to, develop this new genetic medium, and the genetic medium will then turn into evil robots and take over or something. And that prediction depends on the theory being general. And a theory has to be general to be a theory. It can't just be a description of something that might happen, right? Like if I say, well, sometimes, trees fall down, that's not a theory of anything, right? It's not a false statement, but it's not a theory either, right? I mean, that's a dumb example, but, the point is that a theory has to be a general statement about the world. So if the theory is just a statement about something that could happen if under these circumstances, but it might not happen, and it doesn't describe any generalities, any general process or structures of the world, then it's not interesting. It's not really meaningful. So, and that goes back to the Mote and Bailey fallacy that I talked about at the beginning, that people will sometimes present an idea as if it's, wow, it's really exciting, it's got all these profound implications that we should pay attention to. But then when you challenge it, they will walk it back to something innocuous. Like, well, all I'm saying is that water is wet. All I'm saying is that trees can fall down. All right, so that's the really rambly intro to this. And now for the actual discussion, which is 2 hours long. So hope you enjoy it if you actually listen to it. It has some interesting stuff in there. It's not all just rehashing old stuff, but mostly it is. Should show you that it's recording in a minute. Okay. So when this is done, we'll both get a copy of it'll be a video, but just, audio with the screenshot on it, basically. And, you're free to share that. And I assume you're okay with me sharing this audio, right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's actually better because I had my own recording software, but it isn't taking from the desktop. So I was worried about not getting your side of it.
Okay.
But if this is just going to deliver it to both of us, then that's better.
Yeah, it should work. Sometimes the audio is a little bit messy. Skype does weird things to audio, like does a lot of compression and noise cancellation and stuff, so the audio might not be great, but at least it's fairly reliable. So yeah, but you don't have to muck around with all these different things. So anyway, we'll go with this, I guess. All right, so yeah, I was saying that I think what we were going to talk about was like you were going to try to rehabilitate or revise the revolutionary phenotype concept. Is that right?
Yeah, so sort of like what I would see as like a salvage operation, kind of like you said, revitalize it in a way that strips it of the misleading metaphor and the anthropomorphism. Because I do agree with you when I read the book, it does come off sounding pseudoscientific in the way that it puts things. So I kind of always have just run the translation in my head of what JF means when he says things like master slave or servile or DNA did this, and I translate that into ways that actually make sense. And but I could see how they're misleading.
So your goal in this is you think there is underneath the language, you think this is a language issue and that there is a meaningful translation of it?
Yeah, I think his language has mapped the wrong ideas to you. He thinks that you agree with the ideas, but not the language. You think that you disagree about the ideas, and you do disagree about the ideas, but I think they've been wrongly mapped. And I'm not sure that's the case. So this is kind of an experiment to figure that out for myself too, because after talking with JF and with Fathom a few times, I'm still not sure on a couple of things.
Okay, so we can go through it. I will say, well, I don't mind doing this, but I will say that I've never found this interesting. Like I find the issues interesting, but I've never found JF's book or his ideas interesting. So I'm willing to do this up to a point, but I'm not going to invest too much effort into it. I'll just want to say that up front, because with Fathom, the discussions got kind of bogged down, and at some point I just felt it was kind of ridiculous, to be honest. Anyway, but we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, so that's fine. I agree with that, because it may be the case that when you do this reduction, that what's left is something so uninteresting and so maybe not even new. Like as you've said before, that it's just his theory is just a description of how mediums of inheritance come about. It's nothing new that we've known about that. So that might be the case. I've never seen it written anywhere. I've looked around and I can't find any work on how mediums of inheritance come about, how they have their particular arrangement in the system that they have now, things like that. So maybe that's where it breaks ground. I'm not sure.
Possibly. I will say also that the entire thing has a kind of rhetorical mote and Bailey fallacy built into it, and you see this a lot. People will make very strong claims in kind of metaphorical language, or vague language, and then if you challenge those claims, they will retreat from the claims back to something that's sort of innocuous. This mote and Bailey fallacy is very common in ideologies. Like feminists will, if you challenge their feminist theory, they will retreat back to, well, we just believe in equality. Well, of course, that's not what feminist theory is claiming, that, equality is good. It's a little more involved, right? It's got all this other stuff like patriarchy theory and all that. And I see that with JF, that he wants to retreat back to, well, this is just evolution or something, right? Okay, if that's the case, all the outlandish claims go in the garbage, and what's left is basically nothing. And that's my opinion, but it's more than that. I don't think it's just... I think the outlandish claims are making real claims, and the claims are false, and they should be challenged, and it's not just rhetorical flourishes that are added to something innocuous, but it's a very misleading view of evolution and biology that is being presented. And it's linked to another misleading view, which is very common, which maybe is the predominant view, which I would call the gene-centric view. So to me, that's more interesting than talking about JF's metaphors, but we can go into his stuff.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that as well, because you did pose briefly the phenocentric versus genocentric view. And I know Dawkins favors, well, I mean, he pretty much pioneered the genocentric view, and that's the one that JF is taking from, that he's seizing on in this book to claim that this theory is a refutation of, or at least like a temporary refutation that happens every few billion years.
Yeah, I think he's imitating Dawkins, the selfish gene, a lot in his writing. A lot of it comes across as a kind of, I don't know, a very poor second-rate Dawkins. But anyway, I don't know. Let's get into the details. I shouldn't be too harsh, I guess.
So I do agree about that. The attempt to posit something and then, when it's challenged, reduce it down to something that's much more defensible, but then isn't even interesting. So yeah, we'll see if this is what happens with that or not. One last thing before I go into what we can do is, so I didn't hear this before because I didn't listen to the portion of your discussion with JF, the rambling that you had after the debate ended. This is JF and I talk and then I ramble afterward. I didn't listen to the end of that, but at the end of that, you mentioned, how the conversation began. That I was messaging you and I suggested you guys talk, and you said something strange about me. You thought that I was maybe a racialist. I have no idea where that came from. Nothing that I talked to you about alluded even a little bit to that. So,
well, I may have misrepresented. If I did, I apologize. I don't remember saying that, so I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe I assumed you were a racialist, or I got that impression or something. I don't know. JF's crowd is typically racialist, right? So, I mean, it's a natural assumption, but if it's false, then it's false. Yeah. So, yeah, feel free to correct that. And if you want to just talk about what your views are up front before we get into the other stuff, why don't you?
Yeah, we don't need to do that. I think maybe the only thing that alluded to it in the talk is I referenced. I asked what you thought about Brett Weinstein's lineage selection. So maybe that's where you got it from, that I was suggesting that lineages evolve to preserve themselves, and that like a race could evolve for the, individuals in a race can evolve to benefit the race, when that's actually not how evolution works. So that's not what I was arguing.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to go back and listen to it.
All right, no problem. Okay, so the two things we could do is I have your 10 criticisms on your blog post lined out, and then I have written to each of them what I think are refutations of them, and then I can show you where I'm at with each one. And then I have at the end my own version of TRP that I think does drop the baggage, and then maybe retain something. It's pretty brief. It's just a 7 premise, maybe like 7 sentences for it, and then we can see what you think about that. So do you want to start with the blog post criticisms?
Yeah, do you want to go through those point by point? I mean, you can just go through them and give your rejections of them or refutations.
Yeah, we should do it point by point because I don't want to read them all and then go back. So let's do them point by point. So the first one, I'll read your portion and then what I think about it.
Yeah, I'll just mute and let you go ahead, and then after each point, I'll respond.
All right, sounds good. So phenotypic servitude. JF assumes explicitly in his metaphors that the phenotype necessarily serves the genotype. This is false. So that's the criticism, and you have a longer elaboration on those, but I've only had those, and then I just give my thoughts. So I think the phenotypic servitude merely just states it's a statement about the dependence of form that a phenotype has on its genes. It's not a statement at all about survival or reproduction. It doesn't imply that the purpose of the phenotype is to replicate the genotype. I feel like JF does fall into that a little bit in his thinking, and so does Dawkins a little bit. The genotype does not have this sort of dependence of form on the phenotype. The effects of the phenotype and the extended phenotype and memes, etc., are on the genotype are like binary as of right now. They can select against entire genomes, but they can't select portions of it, and certainly not single nucleotides. So that would be the first one. So what do you think about that?
So I'm a bit confused. So by dependence of form, so you agree that there isn't a relationship of instrumentality, though. That's the first point. That's what JF is claiming, that one is the locus of purpose and the other is instrumental to that purpose.
I would not inject purpose into that now.
Well, this is all about purpose. I mean, even if the definition of purpose is the effect that it has been selected to have, I don't think we can talk about life without some kind of teleological language.
Yeah, sure. In that way of meaning purpose, sure. So,
well, okay. So dependence of form, I'm not sure what that means. The form.
Just determining factors. So I mean, I don't think you have an issue with the word determination. I've heard you use it.
Well, I mean, if you say the genes determine the phenotype, I would reject that.
You do?
Yes, of course, because, I mean, so if the phenotype, let's take a simple example, is the cell, genes don't do anything outside of a cell, right? Genes don't replicate. They're not replicators. They are part of a cell, and the cell replicates as a whole. So it's not like the form of a cell is determined by the genes. The form of the cell is mostly determined by the parent cell, right?
Yeah, and I think that there was a useful distinction you brought up between single cell and then multicellular organisms, that difference gets magnified as the complexity magnifies.
Well, the importance of genes actually sort of increases as a determining factor, right? And so genes are a very important informational bottleneck. They contain a lot of information, right? Because that's their function. It's to store, it's to be templates for proteins. That's the main function of genes, right? So they contain a lot of the information of the form, but the form replicates as a whole. It does not replicate, like if you take genes, they will not generate the phenotype. So to say that genes determine the phenotype, the only way in which that is true is that a mutation to a gene can have an effect on the phenotype. Whereas typically, a mutation to another aspect of the form will not have an effect on the genes. There's a one-way replication, right? That's the central dogma of biology, that information goes from DNA to RNA to proteins, and it doesn't go back. Now, that might not be 100% true, but it's close enough to true. So that in that sense, genes are a determining factor. they're not a sufficiently determining factor.
Of course. That's the sense in which I meant, though.
Well, but the point is that you could just as easily say that the genotype depends on the phenotype. Because without a phenotype, there are no genes. There is no gene replication.
Yeah, so that's where I would distinguish between, because you said depends on the phenotype, and I would say dependence of form specifically. I know they depend on, or the genotype depends on the phenotype in order to replicate the system, yeah.
Well, but again, the only dependence is that if a mutation occurs in the gene, it can have an effect on the form. But in most cases, mutations to other aspects of a cell or body will not have an effect on the offspring. But again, that's not 100% true.
So two things. That's exactly what I mean. So we're in agreement with that. And it doesn't need to be 100% true. It actually needs to be false in some instances in order for TRP to work. Because the idea is that part of the phenotype isn't forgetful.
Yes. Well, I mean, again, this metaphor of forgetful.
Yeah, we can get into that, to why that's, when I get into that, I don't need to use, I don't feel like forgetful is something that needs to be used as a word, but.
Okay, so like, if there is an alteration to, say, the centrioles of chromosomes, that will be inherited. Like, we have 23 chromosome pairs, chimpanzees have 24, right? Because two centrioles merged, I guess. That's an example of inheritance that has nothing to do with genes specifically. It's about how DNA is packaged.
That's fine.
And at the single cell level, and especially at an early stage of life, this was more important as an evolutionary factor.
Definitely.
So if we can agree on that, okay. So then, this servitude then is reduced down to basically saying that genes are the medium of inheritance for protein structures.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where the phrase phenotypic servitude or the master-slave relationship came from, but yeah, those are just, to my eyes, that's what they mean.
Okay, and you would also agree that saying that genes are the medium of inheritance for protein structure is just an accepted belief in biology. It's certainly not a new thing. It's just the basic understanding of molecular biology. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, the part that I don't see in biology is any mention of how new genetic layers are appended onto existing ones. You have your RNA world hypothesis, but you don't.
Well, who says there are layers, though?
Or by layers, I just mean, so you have different material taking on different jobs. You have the RNA reading the DNA and writing proteins.
Sure, but you can ask why are phospholipids in the cell membrane and not some other molecule, right? I mean, it's the same kind of question. Like, why is this molecule carrying out this function in a cell? Well, because it evolved to do that, right? Because the cells that had those. Yeah, sorry, go on. Well, I'm just saying, unless you treat this as a very special thing, like unless you genes are a special thing, but they're not that special. They're just another component of a cell, right? And they carry out this role of, being a template for proteins, and which means that mutations to and they are replicated and stored in a fairly high fidelity way, so that mutations to them will have long-term consequences. So that's true, right? But there's no need for any special understanding of how that evolved, unless you assume that structural inheritance doesn't exist, right? If you understand that every aspect of a cell is inherited, cells divide, so the whole cell is copied. So any chemical pathway in the cell is going to be copied. So there's no mystery about how new chemical pathways emerge, really.
Yeah, so I'll kind of have to bow out to, like, again, like I don't, as you go down to the molecular level, my knowledge sort of runs out. I don't look into any of that stuff. I'm beginning to, like, in the sake of trying to figure this out, but I've never seen, like, I Googled things along the lines of how do genetic storage mediums evolve, things like this, and nothing. You get nothing that comes.
Think about how did the phospholipid layer, the cell membrane, evolve?
No clue. I have no clue.
there's no gene that codes for it, right? Or set of genes. There are probably genes involved in the synthesizing the molecules that are part of it or whatever, but so in that sense there are genes involved in it, but it's not like, but it's replicated as a structure, right? It grows and then it divides and you get two cells that contain the phospholipid membranes, parts of the original cell's phospholipid membrane. And how did that molecular pathway that includes phospholipids in the membrane and all these other things, how did that evolve? Well, it arose. Well, I mean, probably it arose as one of the earliest aspects of life, actually, the membrane. And then it perpetuated itself. It replicated itself as part of a cell. So like the origin of life was probably bubbles that contain chemical pathways within them. And basically, if you have an autocatalytic set of molecules in a bubble, you have life. And an autocatalytic set is a set of molecules that can synthesize every molecule in the set given some input of other simpler molecules from the environment. So it's like a closed set of catalytic reactions. And that's the origin of life, that once you get that in a bubble, like you have molecules that are creating copies of the entire set of molecules, then the bubble will grow, split, and then those bubbles will grow and split and grow and split. So all these processes, so again, if you think about everything in terms of genes, you're going to say, how did it all get started? But if you start thinking, back to an earlier stage, it wasn't all about genes. These other things had to be in place too. Anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that you have like a gene up view of everything from the start. I think the mystery that JF poses in the book is how it became to be that RNA used to be the storage medium, and then DNA became the storage medium. So that kind of explanation isn't spelled out anywhere in biology, I don't think, as a field.
Well, it may or may not be. I don't know. People may have posited theories of it. But the thing is, you don't require any special mechanism to do that other than what you had for the phospholipid membrane or any other aspect of an early cell, right? Because any molecular pathway that is autocatalytic, or if you have an autocatalytic set of molecules, so you have a whole bunch of basically reactions that go in circles, right? So that these 5 molecules together catalyze these 5 molecules. Whatever the molecules are, if you have that, then you're going to start replicating those 5 molecules. So it doesn't matter if you don't need a specific medium of inheritance. The medium of inheritance is the actual cell. It's the bag of molecules. It's those 5 molecules, whatever they are.
Yeah, right? I don't think TRP poses like a new mechanism that's different than anything that was previously there. I think if anything, it's a new state of affairs.
Well, I would say my criticism is that we're just talking about evolution. I mean, that's one of my criticisms.
So of your 10 criticisms, that's the one that I openly concede to, because I don't see how this is in contradiction to orthodox views of evolution. And JF keeps insisting that it is, and so does Fathom, and each time I've asked them, I've never really been satisfied with their answers.
It may be that the orthodox view today is a gene-centric view, which assumes that you must have this replicator unit, which is special, and has this instrumental relationship to the rest of the organism. And in that case, you might wonder, well, how did this replicator emerge? How does a new replicator emerge? But if you understand that it's the organism as a whole that is reproducing, then this question doesn't really arise, because there's no one special part of it. And so the RNA is not special, the DNA is not special, right? They're just part of the whole system. And the system can change by evolution. And in the early stages of life, a lot of those changes were just molecular. But now that we're we're 3.5 billion years in the future, well, we're not having a lot of new molecular pathways evolve. What we're having evolve are multicellular, traits in multicellular organisms and stuff like that. Or new specialized proteins or whatever, but not totally new pathways.
Yeah, the only thing I would take issue with is the DNA not special. It's special just in that sense that we meant by the last point, which is that mutations to it have downstream effect on the phenotype.
Right, but again, that's true for other things as well.
Yes, at the
At the cell level.
simplest level, at the cell
Right,
level.
right. And when we're talking how did RNA emerge, we're talking about single-celled, very simple single-celled organisms, simpler than modern bacteria.
Right. So I wouldn't posit that DNA in a human being isn't special.
It's special in this sense that almost all of the variation between humans, that's inherited, maybe all of it, is inherited through DNA. That it's all depends on that, right? But again, if you look at the difference between us and chimps, that's not true. Because even between us and chimps, there's the centriole mutation that occurred. So, I mean, and a lot of evolution takes place by these kinds of structural changes, like duplication or triplication of chromosomes. Like this is used a lot in cultivation, like creating cultivars. Wheat, for example, there are many breeds of wheat that have tripled or doubled the chromosomes for some reason. This has some effect. So it's not all just changing nucleotide sequences, even today. So just to be clear, right? I mean, I agree with the basic point that, yeah, if you look at two people and you look at what are the differences between them that they inherited from their parents, it's going to be almost all genetic. But again, thinking of this as the norm ignores the 3.5 billion years of evolution. And it wasn't the norm 3.5 billion years ago. I mean, it's not a necessary thing. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not a necessary component of life. It's just life happened to evolve this form.
Yep. And I think that we'll see as we get to the end of this. I think that dovetails perfectly with TRP. That you have a set of things that aren't genetic but have found ways to be heritable.
Well, I wouldn't say they have found ways to be heritable. I mean,
yeah, I know you want to say it that way. My bad.
What I would say is that, and I mean, I think this is a problem with modern biology too, that we think about reproduction as copying genes, and that's not what it is. Reproduction is copying the form of an organism, because that's what's selected for. That's the effect that is selected for.
Yeah, well, and I do want to, at some point, maybe towards the end, want you to lay out your case for the phenocentric view, because having read your books, I am more aligned with you than I am with JF on evolutionary matters, and I do think, I was someone in the past who did have this gene-centric view that the body is the vehicle, it's merely a vehicle that the genes are using to reap, and so yeah, I'm not currently making those noises.
Okay, I'm probably inserting too much of my I'm raising too many issues. So so I think we've exhausted the first one, or is there any more to say about that?
That's probably fine.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. And yeah, some other time we can talk more about the genocentric versus phenocentric perspectives.
Or yeah, maybe I'll just wait until you, because I think you're going to post a video on that. So
yeah. Well, I always say I'm going to do things like that, but it takes me a while.
Right, so the second point, phenotypic revolution. JF proposes that what he calls phenotypic revolutions are a new kind of evolutionary process. This is false. So yeah, this point, I don't agree with him on this, or at least I haven't found the pathway that him and Fathom seem to have found. I think that every step along the way, you have a selection of forms that is selected to reproduce themselves. There's no, on the higher levels above the gene level, you have what appears to be like pseudo altruism or pseudo non-selfishness, but you don't have that at bottom. I guess there's no violation of the selfish gene view going on. You may have switched mediums, and you could say poor DNA. It just gave away its printing abilities to something else. But certainly at the gene level, I don't see any relinquishment of selfishness going on. So I don't think it's anything separate from evolution, normal evolutionary theory.
So you're agreeing with that point, but you're using all this language that I would totally disagree with. So, like the selfish gene and the printing ability and all that stuff. But
Oh yeah,
maybe
no, I was giving, I was seizing on JF's language temporarily to
okay.
do that.
We can debate those later. So I think on this point, then you're not really in disagreement, or
Yeah, no, I'm not in disagreement on this
okay,
one.
we'll just move on to the next one, I guess.
And at the end, when I give my version of TRP, I think I've excised all languages that would be non-useful or misleading. So we'll see. A third one, phenotypic forgetfulness. JF claims that the properties of the phenotype are not heritable and are thus forgotten. This is a problem that has to be solved for a new medium of inheritance, such as DNA, to evolve. This is false. For multicellular organisms, it is true, but for non-single-celled organisms, but not for single-celled organisms. So yes, there are parts of the phenotype that are not forgetful, or that are heritable. And as you scale down, we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but as you scale down in complexity, the phenotype and genotypes sort of get blurred, I think.
Right, there's no clear distinction when we're talking about an early form of life, an autocatalytic set.
Yeah,
Really.
definitely. And but this is sort of I think this is something it's aimed as a criticism, but comes out as being a feature of the theory of TRP, because he posits that there's four things that have to occur in order for a new medium of inheritance to come about. And one of the things is this, that it has to be non-forgetful, whatever it is. So the existence of non-forgetful parts of the phenotype is just a feature of the theory. It's nothing that debunks it, I don't think.
Well, he seems to be positing that this is some special thing. Whereas it is actually true for, like I said, for centrioles, I mean, it's true for a lot of things. Like, I mean, for paramecia, the orientation of the cilia and the cell membrane are heritable, and like it's not. Again, I think a lot of it comes down to trying to make the genotype special. The locus of purpose and everything else is secondary and instrumental to it. That's the language he uses. If you think of the genes as just another part of the phenotype which copies itself as a whole, then this just kind of disappears. Now you might say, well, if you mutate this protein, that mutation is not inherited because DNA is the template for that protein, so new copies will be made and it won't get passed on. Okay, fair enough, but there is not some fundamental distinction between the replicators, as Jeff would say, and the phenotypic machines. That there really is just one phenotypic machine, and then within that machine, there are parts of it that play this role of storing information. But there's information stored in the entire form. And like I keep saying, that's not the only place where mutations can be passed on. It's one of the most important, though, right? So I mean, JF sort of defines the phenotype as forgetful by definition. So I don't really know. I mean, I give your position again because I'm not sure I understand the difference between yours and JF's.
Just on this point specifically.
Yeah. Just repeat it. Repeat your refutation.
Yeah. So as you scale down in complexity, down to single cells, you're talking about cells, that the phenotype and the genotype are blurred. It's one thing, one system that everything in it depends on everything else. And then as you scale up to the level of human, that distinction is magnified greatly, and you could take a ton of things that don't get inherited to the next generation. But that it's a feature of TRP. He describes there are four states that need to happen in order for the new medium inheritance to come about, and this is one of them. And so the fact that there exist things that have solved this problem.
Well, but so maybe this is the key point, that it's not that they don't have to solve a problem.
Yeah, I don't think that terminology is needed. I would just say
that the phenotype isn't forgetful per se. That's the important disagreement. That the phenotype, yes, so many aspects of it are not copied into the future, but it's not necessarily forgetful, nor are genes the only thing that carry information forward. And so there isn't some kind of profound problem to solve.
The phenotype is not categorically forgetful.
So I think you're kind of in between the two views then. I don't know if you're agreeing with JF or not there.
No, I agree with you on this. So, yeah, there's portions of it in humans, they're in smaller numbers, but portions of it that are inherited to the next generation but are not encoded in genes. But I don't think that's. I think that's. If I were to switch to JF's language for a second, he's describing potential replicators that have solved the first problem, but not the second three problems.
And what's a replicator in his language?
In his language,
Yeah.
So in his language is here. Let me actually pull from the book to be exact here, but I think it's something along the lines of anything that is read and then written directly into the next into a copy of itself.
So the cell membrane, the centrioles, most of the structures of the cell.
What, are you asking if they would qualify as replicators?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, like, what's the would they qualify? Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe. So he doesn't have a. Let's see.
And why not the whole cell then?
1 second. I just want to pull this definition. Actually, I don't think he has to define it in here. I think Fathom had the same issue as you in his talk. He went to go look for replicators in the book and couldn't find the definition. Yeah, there's nothing, because he does a lot of coining of terms in this book, but I guess replicator isn't one of them. I could have sworn it was.
I think it's an assumption. I think I think a lot of this comes from an underlying metaphor of thinking of the gene as the replicator, as a kind of agent that copies itself, and the body as sort of a, vehicle or.
Well, I wouldn't push it that far to say that if you were to ask him, he would say, yes, there's agency among DNA or something like that. So if we're going off of what I think is his view, which is just anything that is read and then written, because that's what he told you in his last talk with you.
But nothing, again, these are metaphors. Nothing is read and then written.
Well, read and written in the sense that DNA polymerase reads DNA, and then.
Sure, there's a mechanism that copies the information in DNA, one DNA molecule, into another new DNA molecule. So there's a synthesis, a catalyzation of that information into a new molecule, or a catalyzation of a new DNA molecule that contains the same sequence of nucleotides. Okay, but again, that's not how the centrioles get replicated.
Yeah, so I don't know that they would qualify in his terms as a replicator.
So, but then is the term replicator defined only as a DNA strand? I mean, because you see, if you just define replicator as DNA, then okay, fine, but.
Yeah, he's not implying that the replicator has to be the thing doing the replication. It's just the thing that's replicated.
Yeah, but.
There are other things doing the replication.
Right, but I mean, everything about a cell is replicated during cell division, right?
Yeah.
And not everything is written, so to speak, using this mechanism that's used for DNA copying.
Precisely.
So then that this is a kind of an important point, right? That it's not like DNA genes are replicators or DNA is a replicator. It's that, like every other aspect of the cell, it is copied during cell division, and a new copy of that DNA molecule is created, just like a new cell membrane is created, new chromosomal organization is created, new Golgi body or whatever, all that stuff.
Yes, so yeah, we agree that the entire cell is replicated. I don't know if there is a disagreement in there.
Well, I just think he's thinking about it metaphorically as special, as this is the real, because again, he just sort of takes for granted that the whole thing is about replicating the DNA. And so he thinks of the DNA as the locus of purpose, the thing that is being replicated, or the thing that everything else is serving, to use his language. And so all this machinery, replicating the cell membrane, whatever, it's all about replicating the DNA and the information in the DNA.
Yeah, and that's sort of how Dawkins comes across as I'm reading The Selfish Gene.
Dawkins thinks about it that way too, and that is kind of misleading. But okay, anyway, so I guess we're sort of in between on that one. We can just go to the next one. And
all right, that's fine by me. So next one is replicators all the way down. JF believes that the properties of life extend all the way down to the quantum level. There's no reason to believe this. JF does not understand emergence, so he doesn't understand how one kind of order can emerge from another, such as biology emerging from chemistry or psychology emerging from biology. So I think if you asked him directly, he would tell you, yes, you have levels of order that emerge on top of other levels. I don't think it's that he doesn't get that. I think what he's positing is just a possibility that the thing that was the first biological forms, proteins, for example, came on the back of some other replicator that he admits it hasn't even been identified yet.
Yeah, so why posit that though? Why do you think he needs to posit that, which when it doesn't actually, there's no evidence for it and it doesn't make any sense?
Well, he doesn't need to. It's sort of tangential to TRP.
I think he does though. And look, he does this in other ways too. Like he'll try to reduce, not only does he try to reduce the purpose of the body or the organism to replicating the genes, then he tries to reduce or project it down into the printer genes, right? There's this weird like genome within the genome and phenotype within the genotype and all this stuff.
Dawkins does that too. I remember him saying in his book that there are genes that are more selfish than other genes.
Well, I would certainly disagree with that, and we can talk about Dawkins later, but JF views it this way, I think, because he doesn't see that purpose emerges out of the holistic process of reproduction. So he's trying to find the purpose, right? What's the purpose? Oh, it's in the gene. Oh, but then we can do the same thing and take it down another level. Oh, it's in the printer genes. Or maybe it's even lower. Maybe it's in, he has this like...
Well, it's like a complexity management operation that he's doing.
It's not really complexity management because he's not reducing the complexity. It's more of an infinite regress, kind of a pseudo homunculus theory, right? Where if he can't see the purpose in the whole, so he tries to find it in one of the parts by projecting properties of the whole onto the part. And then he keeps doing that operation, and it doesn't end anywhere.
All right, and I can maybe take a look at this part of the book later on, but I'm pretty sure this isn't important for the idea. It's just sort of a what if. Same thing with his hypothetical at the end. It's sort of a what if prediction.
Well, okay, look, first of all, the hypothetical at the end is the premise of the book in terms of how he's selling it. So to say that this is an unimportant aspect of it would be very misleading, right? Like this is what he sold the book as. Like, oh, there's this big threat of genetic engineering will mean that there's robots ruling over us or some science fiction story.
Yeah, you're right. That is how he advertises it, yeah.
Yeah. And then honestly, that's right away as soon as I saw that, because I know that's not how technology works. As soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, that's bullshit pseudoscience. There's no reason to read this. So, like, again, that's why I told Fathom, I know this is bullshit. I can debunk it if you really want me to, but, this is not interesting.
So let me pose an example to you, though. Would you say, so I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Darwin's prediction about orchids? Do you remember that one?
Darwin predicted something about orchids? I don't know. I know he grew orchids, but I don't know what his prediction was.
He received an orchid that was sent to him, and there was a very long distance from the opening of it to where the nectar or whatever is inside is kept, and so he reasoned or to give a prediction that there would have to be some kind of animal that has a tongue long enough to reach the base.
Right.
Yes. So that's a prediction that's sort of, it's derived from the theory, but you wouldn't be tempted to say that this prediction, that his theory depends on this prediction. I mean, in some sense it does, because...
Well, if Darwin had sold his theory as being about explaining this one thing about orchids, and that was like, it wasn't called The Origin of Species, it was called The Origin of Orchids Size or something. I mean, I would certainly judge it, but anyway, Darwin was not right about everything, but I think he's right about the orchid.
Yeah, so after he died, they did find a kind of moth that has a tongue that goes all the way down, that far. But my point would be that, like, what if it another means by which you could get to an orchid like that through natural selection, and he was just giving a possible idea. Possibly it just there's a moth that can do this. So I kind of see that's how I see the prediction story, is that given these premises, this is one potential future. But the fact that wouldn't happen doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the theory.
Yeah, you can separate we still haven't really established what the theory is. I mean, but assuming you can even establish what the theory is, dig it out of that pile of rhetoric. Again, remember, it was all wrapped up in this science fiction story. So that's the wrapping paper. That's the selling point. And if that selling point is wrong, well, you might say, well, yes, if I spend a long time digging through this, I can find there something interesting buried in there. But, I mean, when I see something like that, which is just obviously retarded, I can't think of a better word for it. I'm just...
Is it retarded in principle, though? Because
yes.
In principle?
Well, maybe not retarded. Okay, not retarded, but it's wrong. It's wrong. But it's also it's the way pseudoscience is sold to people, right? And he knows how to sell these things. You don't sell it by telling people the truth and explaining the details, getting into the nitty-gritties and saying, well, here are some equations or whatever. You sell it by making these grand claims that people find appealing. I mean, pseudoscience is science fiction, kind of,
So I want to keep what I have to say about that still with that criticism.
Okay, fair enough. So, but I guess we diverged off onto that. But what was the point we're on now?
So the one after the replicators all the way down is the printer concept.
Okay, but so we finished replicators all the way down, I think.
Yeah. So that one to me doesn't seem like his theory lives or dies on that prediction.
It may not live or die on it, but still, I think that's a valid criticism.
Okay.
Of the way he presents, it's in his ideas that this concept of, well, you just keep going down another layer and you find another deeper replicator kind of thing. I'm certainly not. I'm not persuaded to abandon that claim. Anyway.
All right. So next one, the printer concept. JF's concept of a printer makes no sense. The printer concept includes a very strange false equivalence between mutation and control. So that one kind of refers to or I can hyperlink that one back to the first one, which is that by control or servitude, which in the first criticism, control, all that's meant is that dependence of form, lies in that entity.
Well, he'll say things like genes print memes.
Yeah, and that skips over all of the steps in between.
Well, not only that, but it just doesn't make sense. Like there's a dependence of form in both directions. So,
well, you already said before that there is an asymmetry between the genes and the phenotype, and that changes to the phenotype don't typically.
Yes, but when we're talking about memes, like say for example, you could use is fire. The use of fire. Human digestive system is adapted to the use of fire. The use of fire is a meme. It shaped biology.
It shaped biology by selecting out entire genomes.
Well, it's selected for certain genes that
certain genomes. It couldn't select. Did it select single nucleus?
I don't know what you mean by select for genomes. I mean, I don't know. It's selected for traits. However, those traits were genetically encoded doesn't really matter. I mean, like, for example, humans have a very small abdomen, a very small stomach. That's kind of crucial to walking upright, actually. And we're also not adapted to eating raw food because our bodies can't really digest it. So the use of fire for hundreds of thousands of years has shaped the human phenotype. So that's an example where behavior affects genes, right? Because it changes the environment in which selection operates.
All right, that's I think the term for that is Baldwin effect, cultural forms that originate in the culture or in the behavior and then change the underlying biology.
Yeah, it's more of a co-adaptation that these things will emerge together, like the dairy farming and lactose tolerance, right? Those things will co-evolve mimetically and genetically. So genes print memes does not make sense there, right? I mean, how is that a description of anything?
Yeah, I think when there's probably a long, you need to elaborate on that a long time before that statement makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but also when he'll talk about printers controlling things, he won't talk about a printer simply being a replication device.
Yeah, so they're just it's wrapped in misleading metaphor, sure.
Well, it's wrapped in this teleological language about, well, not only that though, but even if you just take away the teleological language, it's not like the human body was selected to copy printer genes. Okay, that's just not true, right? The human body was selected to reproduce, not to copy printer genes. I mean, it's just silly to say that, right? Like, it just doesn't. I mean, it's just really just. This is where it becomes kind of absurd. Like, the language just becomes kind of absurd when he starts talking about trickster printers and all this nonsense, and printer genes evolving to print the right mutations and all this shit. I mean, this is insane. Mutations are random by definition.
So what about? So let's take one of your ideas. So your position on eugenics, could that not be said as an attempt to print the right genes, or the right mutations, rather?
Well, it's an attempt to regulate the population and the genome. So it's an attempt to regulate the genome. It's a selection process. So it's analogous to natural selection, right?
Yeah.
But JF doesn't think of selection as printing.
So in he has a very detailed chapter about that, because he admits it is arbitrary. You can contrive a selection event that's so precise that it's indistinguishable from printing.
But that's not really the issue. The issue is not whether selection is indistinguishable from printing. It's just that, I mean, printing, in the only kind of meaningful sense of printing, is just replication. You know, like DNA, you could say, is printed. The sequence of nucleotides, you could say, is printed into a new molecule. Okay, that use of the metaphor would not be very misleading. You could sort of say that an organism prints itself when it reproduces or something like that. That's a little bit weird, but it's not that misleading. But that's totally different from selection. And it certainly has nothing to do with directing evolution. Replication does not direct evolution. Replication replicates information. Mutations occur, and then selection acts on mutations. Whatever printer might be, it's not like it controls the direction of evolution or controls the phenotype, because it's not the same as selection. And he seems to be mixing those things up. And I don't know why he thinks it's important, even like what you were just saying, that you could have selection that's indistinguishable from printing. What does that even mean? What printing? What does he mean by printing there?
I think he gives an example of you have, let's say you're printing a book or a set of books, and you put it into a library, and then so it's a printing event, and then you have a selection event, which is a fire occurring in the library and destroying certain information from the books and leaving other information retained. And if you had a controlled enough example where you're just burning specific letters from sentences, and then what remains are still words, but maybe different words, things like that, then you get to the area where you can't really distinguish between the two.
But hold on, whoa. That doesn't make any sense.
Which part?
The whole thing doesn't make any sense, because, like, printing is replicating. It's not writing. A printer doesn't write your novel for you. The printer just copies it from one piece of paper to another, or from, a computer disk to another medium or something.
Yeah, you could just say a library full of printed books, and you don't have to say that the printing was the writing of the books.
No, but how is he analogizing selection to printing? I don't get it. Selection doesn't copy something. It shapes, forms, it selects, right? That's the meaning of selection. Printing and selection are almost opposite concepts. Because printing just replicates, selection shapes, right? Those are totally different.
Yeah. The selection, yes, there's an element that the printing has that the selection doesn't.
Well, it's not just an element. That I don't understand. I just don't understand this at all. Okay.
Maybe I don't either, because I don't. It's confusing me too.
Yeah, I think he's just confused. I don't think there's any logic or reason behind this. It's just JF doesn't get it. He's confused. He's confused himself with his own metaphors because he started to think about printing as control. Like, that's why he says things like genes print memes, as if genes are somehow controlling the memes. Whereas it's selection that is selecting genes and memes. It's not printing. It's not the genes pulling the strings or something. It's selection. That's not printing.
So let me try to clear this up for one last time, I guess, for myself even. So let's say you could take a seed of tomato and you could gene edit it to have a certain sequence of nucleotides, and then you could accomplish the same thing by just selecting.
Well, hold on. That's genetic engineering, not printing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, just to be clear, it's not copying the genes of the tomato seed or copying the tomato seed. It's not copying. It's consciously selecting. If you're talking about genetic engineering.
Yeah, or even we don't even have to go. I just went to that example because it was just there in my mind. But you could even just say a seed, a tomato seed that just had a mutation that made it somewhat favorable to replicating itself. And then you can imagine you could achieve the same effect by just selecting out bad ones and letting only the ones that are better, the more desirable to you to live. At the end, you have the same product.
Wait, say that again, because that didn't make sense. You said, suppose you have a mutation. Okay, so a mutation in one individual tomato plant, or one individual tomato seed.
Sure.
Okay, what does that have to do with printing?
Well, I'm not sure. So I'm looking for printer in his book.
Well, it's a mutation, right? It's not printed. It's randomly generated by some, you could say, printer error or something, right?
Yeah. So the printer. What are you referring to as a printer in this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he uses it as a metaphor. I think what he's talking about are like the protein complexes that replicate DNA. So I think that's the one meaning of it, right? So there's a protein complex that is involved in synthesizing a new DNA strand using an existing one as a template. And if you want to call that printing, fine.
Okay.
But that's not genetic engineering. That's not mutation. Mutations might occur, but the printer is not choosing them. They just happen, right? And it's selection that determines what mutations exist, what mutations exist in the world in large numbers of individuals. And so what we perceive as, a horse is because that form was selected from the mutations that occurred, right?
Yeah.
There's no analogous printing process. Like, printing and selection are not analogous at all.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I do see a distinction, yes, but I don't know. I think from what I remember, he was just alluding in the book that the distinction is arbitrary.
Maybe he's confusing the replication of a single DNA molecule or single organism with selection. I mean, I don't know, but anyway, I think it just doesn't, the whole printer thing, it just, the language around that is just so bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. All this stuff, trickster printer and all that stuff. I mean, whatever. I think we should just go to the next one. If you come up with a way of making sense of it, then maybe later we can circle back.
Yeah, I don't think I remember his book well enough to know what he meant by that. Okay. Yeah, so we can go to the next one. So JF believes that the only printer genes, or that only printer genes are selfish in Dawkins' sense of the term. This is false. All aspects of the phenotype are selfish.
I mean, I might want to amend that and really just say that the phenotype as a whole is selfish. I probably shouldn't have said all aspects of it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I don't think I have a problem with that because I do agree. Well, let me think about this for a little bit. And the Dawkins in terms of selfishness. So acting as a unit to increase the frequency of the genes.
Well, if that's the definition, then the gene is definitely not selfish. Genes don't do anything, right? So, I mean, they sit there. So,
Yeah. I don't think I have nothing comes to mind really about this one specifically.
okay.
But again, like, I'm actively trying to work out these ideas, so maybe something.
Yeah, yeah. If you come up with it, I mean, it's not like a gotcha thing. I am sort of, I am losing my patience with this material to some extent, so I can't promise to do it forever. But if you want to do one more iteration, I guess I could do that.
Yeah, I'm not sort of going into this trying to come out on either side because I don't I don't really have
Right.
a dog in that fight.
Yeah,
So
I know. And
that's what I think separates, because if you have a talk with JF, you could point to mountains of motivation that he has to come out on his side, because I think for right now his entire livelihood depends on this idea, because he makes most of his money from the book.
yeah,
And so I don't think he's super motivated to debunk himself.
yeah, for sure. No, this is why we're this far into this discussion, obviously, right? So, but I mean, to JF's credit, although I criticize him a lot, he was willing to have the debate both times. He was willing to entertain opposing views, and that is more than a lot of people are willing to do. So, I'm just honestly, it's sort of like this: the more I have to read this stuff or react to it, and the more it irritates me, and so the more ill will I sort of build up. But he was, I just want to give him credit for being willing to have a discussion, and I don't want to just bash him without giving him credit for that.
Yeah, and I don't think he secretly thinks that he's wrong, because if the predicted behavior, if that were the case, would be that, yeah, he wanted to have had that second discussion.
Yeah, I don't know. People are in bad faith at lots of levels. Anyway, all right. So what's the next?
Yeah, this next one is where I get more interested, because I'm more interested at this level than the molecular level. So memetics is wrong. JF believes that memes cannot evolve to be parasitic on humans. This is false. So I don't like, this is another one where maybe he takes his thinking to an extreme, and it appears that he doesn't think that that you can have, over time you could have parasitic memes, but surely he believes that parasitic memes exist. He would say a lot of what the left believes in is a parasitic meme.
I don't know about that. Would he?
So parasitic, just in the sense that the holder of the idea has less children.
Yeah, but would he claim that it evolved to do that, or would he say that this is just? Because he almost seemed to be saying, when I was debating with him, that the English language is determined by your genes or shit like this. Like, it's just insane. Like, this is, again, where the claims are so, like, off the charts crazy that, I mean, obviously languages evolve on their own, and they're not like an expression of the genes, right? And he might say, well, a language can't evolve that is harmful to the genes, because it would, if it harmed the genes, then the genes wouldn't, it would cease to exist. But that's like saying diseases can't exist, or parasites can't exist, or parasites can't evolve. I mean, I don't remember exactly what he said in the book, but he has made that claim on multiple occasions. He actually agreed to debate me on that on a separate point, I think earlier than this book. Or maybe it was later, I don't remember, but he backed out of that. So,
Oh wait, on what exact claim?
well, somebody on Twitter said that, you should debate BG on this claim, whether memetics is possible. I might even be able to find it.
He may have slightly changed his position from saying memetics is wrong to saying, okay, memes are real and they evolve, but their evolution is within the bounded space provided by the trickster printer. So that's yeah, that would be.
What does the trickster printer have to do with memes?
In JS language, a trickster printer is the thing that's printing the memes. So the human brain DNA.
So the brain DNA is a trickster printer and prints memes? I mean, you see why I hate this language, right? So you go to school and you learn something, it's like your brain printed it. So your brain printed the English language or something? I mean, it's just crazy. How is the brain a trickster printer? What is that supposed to mean?
Yes, I'm not sure that I want to adopt his frame for a moment, because a lot of this is I'm trying to see if there's something below it that's actually defensible.
Okay, but what would are you refuting what I said, or are you just saying, well,
No, I was telling you what he would think.
no, but I mean, do you have a refutation for that point, or do you agree with it, or?
No, yeah. So I think memes can evolve, definitely. They can evolve to be parasitic on humans, and in your book you gave examples like feminism and the birth control pill. They exist, they evolved, but across time you just have this tendency by selection for the amount of people that meme is palatable to be around. They're just less and less in numbers, and then they eventually sometimes are just gone entirely.
Sure. So yeah, so this is like the same kind of relationship with parasites, diseases. That resistance to them can evolve. The parasites evolve. The host evolves. So yeah.
Yeah, so we're in agreement on that.
So you agree? Okay, good.
I just think I think that if you were to ask JF, can memes evolve? He would say yes, but in a bounded space.
Well, I will dig up his claims that the memetics is wrong. I have, again, people have asked him to debate me on that, and like on Twitter, it's somewhere in the. I can find it in the DMs. I don't know if I can find the original point, but he has made claims to that effect. I think they are in the book too.
He may have, yeah, like over time switched it to something that's more defensible. I don't know. I haven't really been following him for very long to know that. But I know that the most recent noises that he makes on that are that, yes, that it's just a bounded fitness space.
Okay, I think he's walking back from an earlier position that's much stronger than that, but we can move to the next one.
All right, so the next one is the relationship between biology and culture. JF has a very confused idea of how culture and biology are related. So I think this may be the same instance of another one. I don't know if he started off this way or if he pulled back to it, but I think that yes, he would say there's a feedback loop between the culture and the biology.
Does he say that in the book though? What does he say in the book?
About
the relationship. Like I don't remember specifically.
I just read it recently and I don't remember even, so that's why I have the e-text pulled up.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at. Well, so what was my point that I made there?
That he just doesn't. He thinks there's one causal direction, straight from biology to culture. That there's no feedback.
Isn't that true though? Isn't that what he says basically?
So in passing, I have heard him make claims that are close to that. But then if you ask him to dig into the details or if he elaborates, he means, okay, well, there is a feedback, but it's a feedback that's always within this bounded space.
Okay. Well, I think if I went through the book, I could find the examples of the stronger claim. Oh, here's I have an example of actually a quote that I'm referring. I'll just read this. So this is a quote from the book. Do DNA queens have access to modifying the queens of human culture? Answer, yes. DNA can produce different brains that will modify the culture they pass on in various ways. Everything in human culture, from single letters to syllables to the entire meaning of a sentence, and even the emotional meaning of an entire story, can be modified by a human brain. Okay, so this is an example of just very confused thinking. So he says modified by a human brain, true, but is a human brain a DNA queen? No. Can DNA queens do anything? Can they modify anything? No, they can't. Selection can modify DNA, and the selection could affect culture through the modification or changing of the genome, right? The frequencies of genes or what genes exist in a genome. But can a DNA molecule do anything about culture? No, it's just expressed, right? So he's using this language of agency as if the DNA in the brain is modifying or determining the culture, when it's selection that is determining the culture in the long run. And it's psychology that's determining it in the short run. And psychology is first of all, it's way above the level of DNA. It's not like the English language. Again, that's the silly example, right? Oh, do you think the English language, the letters, the syllables, are encoded in nucleotide sequences? I mean, it's stupid, right? Obviously not. But anyway, so this is an example of it that I had written down, that I'd copied out of his book. And then he also said, do the queens of human culture have access to modifying DNA queens? Answer, no. At the moment of writing this book, no human culture on Earth has reached a point where it determines which letters of DNA are to be modified in a human baby. Well, again, this is confused. As I pointed out, culture has shaped our genome, right? So he's mixing up evolution with like agency or control in a single organism. Anyway, I went into some detail on that, right? I talked about this for quite a while. I talked about how genes affect memes, how memes affect genes, how culture and biology. I'll just read one thing I wrote here. I'm not going to read it all. I said, JF seems to confuse the control of the brain over memes with the control of genes over memes. The brain can select one meme versus another, or modify memes during a person's lifetime. That is the function of the brain. Genes, however, cannot select one meme versus another, or modify memes during a person's lifetime. They merely determine the structure of the brain. And even that's a bit of an overstatement, I should say, but whatever. The confusion probably arises because JF thinks of genes as active entities rather than inert information. The brain is active, it does things. Genes are just information, and they don't change during one's lifetime. So that's what I had to say about that, and I'm curious if you would agree or disagree.
So I agree with you on that, but I'm not sure if you posed it to Jeff, you said, because you did this in your talks with him, if you put DNA into a petri dish, what's going to happen? And I don't think he would be tempted to say, oh, it's gonna replicate the.
Oh no, I'm not saying JF. If you put it to him in that way, sure. But when he's talking about these things, see, people can believe contradictions when the contradictions are buried in language, metaphors, and so on.
Yeah.
Of course he knows. Like if I say, JF, if I put DNA in a petri dish, will it create a phenotype? He's going to say, no, of course not. But then again, he's going to turn around and use exactly that language. He's going to say, gene replicators create phenotypic machines to replicate themselves. Right? So there is a contradiction in his thought, and it has to do with this metaphor that is deeply embedded in the way he's thinking about this. Right? Well, why would he talk about... I read verbatim what he wrote. Do DNA queens have access to modifying the queens of human culture? What does that mean? Like, how can you make sense of that?
So I think something like do mutations that occur to the queen or the gene have some sort of downstream effect on the culture? Yeah,
but if you accepted that, then the second point would be false, right? Because the 2 points are, he says, do DNA queens have access to modifying the queens of human culture? Answer, yes. Do the queens of human culture have access to modifying DNA queens? Answer, no.
Yeah. So I think
you can't believe both of those things.
That's where he invokes the asymmetry in the relationship, though.
But there isn't. But you can't. The way you described it, right? You're saying, well, there could be a mutation to DNA that could then eventually affect culture. Sure. There could be a mutation to memes or a change in the culture that eventually affects DNA.
But the asymmetry is in the level of operation. So you could change, like let's say there's a hypothetical, I think he gives us, you change a single letter, you could have cultural change. Can you have a cultural meme that operates on single letters of DNA?
Well, sure. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but maybe lactose tolerance is just a single nucleotide, single base pair mutation. I don't know. Why not? Again, the devil's in these metaphors. If operating on means has selective effects on, then the answer has to be yes for both. You can't have it one way and then switch to a different meaning for the other statement.
Yeah, I agree with the selective effects thing. I think what he's trying to capture is that there is currently an asymmetry in the level at which you can do it.
What do you mean, though? I don't understand. What asymmetry?
Well, so with lactose tolerance, let's say you posited the possibility that that is just a single nucleotide difference.
Well, I don't know. I mean, sure.
Yeah, I don't know either about that. But more than likely, it was just that the entire genome of a person who wasn't as good at processing lactose was selected against.
That doesn't make sense. You don't select against the genome of a person.
Or the entire phenotype then.
But what do you mean, though? No, what happens is that, there's a mutation that occurs in somebody, and it gives them a slight advantage. Maybe they live a bit longer, they have a few more kids, whatever. So then they have sex, and half of their offspring inherit that. And then those people have a slight advantage. And then their offspring inherited, and so on and so forth. And so the frequency of the gene increases in the population. That's evolution, right?
Sounds good.
Okay, so it's not selecting against the whole genome or one phenotype.
Like the things that have the advantage are
But what's the asymmetry that you're talking about?
the asymmetry and resolution of I guess.
Resolution of what, though? What does that even mean? Like a resolution of what?
Well, like let's say with our tomato example, let's take the genetic engineering one.
Well, but we've established that a cultural change can have an effect that might be a single base pair, right? If it confers an advantage in that culture, because that culture keeps cattle, right?
Yeah, sure.
So
well, I don't know that because you said maybe so sure maybe it's a single.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I'm just saying hypothetically it could be, right? It could be lots of things, but it doesn't really matter. Even the notion that a single base pair mutation is somehow simpler than a duplication of a, well, whatever. It just doesn't really matter what it is, but it's at the resolution of genes, right? So what's the asymmetry?
I don't know if I've just gotten wrapped up in confusion. I mean, I couldn't. Let me think about this for a second. I don't know. I would suppose that probably the single base pair effects that you're saying that a culture or meme could have on an organism probably aren't the norm.
Well, it doesn't really matter. It's selection. I mean, almost all selection is going to operate on little genetic changes, right? Like, or are you proposing some other way that it's happening? I mean, I don't know what you're proposing. Are you saying that there's some big leap of evolution that
No, I don't know on this point really.
Yeah, I think again, this is a thing where I think JF is just confusing himself and others with his language, and this is just nonsense. This is utter nonsense. It's just I can't be more charitable than that.
Yeah, no problem. All right. I think Fathom mentioned to me that he had some talks with you after his initial one. They didn't get uploaded though.
There's one that terminated in the middle, which if you're interested, I can point you to it. I don't think it's any. I don't know where it is, but I probably have it somewhere. But it terminated where it terminated is just honestly, I just lost my patience. I got pissed off because I was just so sick of just epicycles. And the epicycle in this case was that he was saying that the printer genes could evolve to print the right mutations. Okay, now this is just insane because mutations are mutations. They're not they're not genetic engineering. The molecules that synthesize DNA are not sentient, intelligent beings selecting clever mutations or something. And so so he was saying, but they could evolve to somehow like print mutation, make errors in a way that somehow benefits them or something. And even if this were true or whatever, it wouldn't make any difference. Because then you just have to duplicate the entire genome inside the so-called printer genes, right? It's just a infinite regress, homunculus fallacy. And, I was just like, I mean, I didn't say we couldn't have another discussion. I'd still talk to Fathom. But I just got sick of it. Like, this is just crazy, right? So I just ended it because I was losing my temper. But if I can dig it up if you're interested, I can probably find it.
No, it's not that I have to hear it. I brought that up because I think him and JF are probably both in better positions than I am to argue for this. Because like some of the stuff that.
But aren't you in a position to admit that this is wrong? I mean, it's pretty clear. I don't think this is hard to. It's hard to admit that these two statements here. I mean, maybe you can go and read them, I guess, and think about them. But I think I made the argument pretty persuasively that this is obviously wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm in a position to say that I don't understand it, sure, and so I'm not gonna grant that he's right on that. I'm just confused, really.
Sure. So this is the relationship between biology and culture. There's a section on that that's about 5 or 6 paragraphs long, contains quotes from the book, the two that I read to you, that were side by side, and it points out the inconsistency in the view. So just go back and read that, and if you think there's more to it, or if you think I got it wrong, then by all means correct me. I'm open to being corrected, but
because my intention was sort of to have an ongoing. I mean, you said earlier that you probably don't want it to be ongoing because you're getting frustrated with these ideas, but I didn't see this as like a one-off debate and then that's it for the end of the time. I kind of tried to just. Yeah.
But there is sort of a limit to how much time I want to put into it. Yeah,
it's understandable.
But yeah, I'm willing to talk a little bit more if you want to go back and circle back. But you said you had refutations for the points I made, and to be honest, I don't think you have refuted any of them.
Oh yeah, I don't know if refutations was a good word. I just what I have. Or what I think of them and basically where I'm at with it. I don't think that, because for a lot of them I did just leave them blank because I don't really have good answers for them. So
okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to allude that I've debunked all these and I'm gonna read them to you. So.
Okay. I'll just try to control my. It's not aimed at you, and it wasn't aimed at Fathom, but I do find some of this stuff sort of triggering. Like, it just kind of it irritates me. Okay, so the last two things were the phenotypic separation theory of sex, which I think JF has probably walked away from now because he didn't want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think just the way that he. So what was your objection was this makes no sense because mitosis is not a way of producing offspring. It creates two new organisms from one. JF describes the evolution of sex as a queen cell producing haploid cells. This makes no sense. So,
right, because the queen cell would no longer exist after the haploid cells are created.
His theory is that at some point a queen cell produced haploid copies of it, but that were sterile.
But then the queen cell is destroyed by the process of meiosis.
I think he says at first it was mitosis, and then they engaged in meiosis with each other. So the first one wasn't.
Okay,
that's what I remember from it.
So he thinks first there's a mitotic step, then the haploid cells are created, and somehow this makes them helper cells? Why does that make them helper cells?
Yeah, he said that could have been a few reasons, so.
I don't think this makes any sense. I mean, I think why sex evolved is that sex creates a bottleneck. The creation of a zygote is a bottleneck, and that forces the cells of the body to work together toward the reproduction of the zygote. It's like a way of ensuring the multicellular contract. Because if, cancer is a defection on the multicellular contract, but cancer cannot produce a new body, and so I think sex evolved as a way of making multicellularity possible, or at least making it work better.
Well, so what did do you also, because he poses that there's a problem with the current way that we think sex evolved, because there's a two-step problem in which after the first step doesn't seem to benefit the organism at all, so it's questionable how it even got to the second step for it to then be beneficial.
Well,
so I think.
What are the two steps?
I did pull them up. Let's see.
I mean, it is a bit of a mystery. Sex is a bit of a mystery. I mean, it also accelerates evolution. And that could have been one of the reasons it evolved, just because sexually reproducing organisms outraced other other types of life in a sort of evolutionary race, but
that's only an explanation after the second step.
sorry, what are the two steps?
Yeah, I'm looking through it right now. So I'm on his chapter about it. Oh, here we go. Oh wait, no, it's here it is. The problem is that there we go. In the past, biologists have tried in vain to come up with explanations for meiosis. Evolutionary biologists agree that there is a plethora of advantages that sexual life forms benefit from once the reproductive cycle is established, but most all agree that we face difficulties in developing evolutionary explanations for how meiosis showed up in the first place. In other words, we know why sexual life forms are successful, but our explanations only work to explain the success of sexual life forms that already exist. We struggle to find an explanation for evolving the capacity to have sexual reproduction in the first place. So I think the first step he's referring to is the separation of the genome into two halves.
Yeah, well, it's true that the eukaryotic cell in general is kind of a mystery. Like the way chromosomes line up and all of the things that go on there. Presumably there was a single chromosome initially. That's my guess, right? That's probably how it evolved from a single, the chromosome was a kind of nucleus within a nucleus or something. But yeah, I mean, how does it evolve? I don't know. I could think about it, but I don't think his explanation makes any sense. Like why would haploid cells help the diploid queen cell? I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. To me, I think the main reason for sex to evolve is that it creates a reproductive bottleneck, which then creates an incentive for cells to work together because they can't reproduce by mitosis. So it probably has to do with creating helper cells, but they're diploid helper cells. And then the haploid cells are the gametes. Anyway, but I don't know. Like so probably something like there's an initial cell which, well, I have some idea about it, but it's not really that relevant here. Like I just don't see, even the way you're describing it, why would haploid cells help the diploid queen? I don't get it.
Yeah, so I found the portions where he's offering potential explanations for what is useful about having haploids. He said perhaps the sterile offspring helped regulate the environment. Perhaps they simply make good bait for viruses.
So he assumes they were sterile.
Yeah, they were sterile. Yeah.
But well, I don't know. Who knows? I don't think that's what happened, but.
Well, does it even even if you're not going to put your chips on that on that possibility, is it at least possible that this happened?
I guess yeah. I'll walk back this criticism because honestly, I just didn't read through that, and I'll just say we can entertain that idea. It doesn't sound very plausible to me, but I mean, I still don't get it. Like again, you have a single cell, which first has to split by mitosis, which creates two new cells with their own biological incentives, right?
Right. Yeah.
Then one of them splits into haploid cells.
Not splits into, but just replicates haploids. So it's still around, and the haploids are there.
Yeah, but it has to. You can't bud off haploid cells unless you're saying. Is that what he's saying? That it budded off haploid cells? And how does it become diploid in the first place then?
The queen cell?
Well, it seems more likely that it would go the other way around. That any cell, it seems more likely that two cells would merge to create a diploid cell.
Yeah, that's what he's referring to as the second step. Is first you have a bunch of haploids, and then some mutation occurs where they remerge.
But there's still a lot of mysteries involved there because how would they then? I mean, that seems more likely, right? So probably biologists have talked about this. I don't know, that it occurred by fusion, and then when the cells go to replicate, instead of producing two new cells, the fused two cells produce four cells, right? That seems like a reasonable evolutionary step. But then the new haploid cells would have to fuse again with haploid cells to produce new diploid cells, right? So you can see an evolutionary pathway for that to happen ironically, by a structural mutation, not a genetic one. In this case, the mutation is the actual literal fusing of two cells to form a composite cell, right? So I can probably, think through this, but I don't see any way that haploid helper cells. I think he's just using an analogy to drones and bees or something. I don't know. Well, even in bees, the workers are diploid. They're not haploid.
Oh, they are? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the drones are like sperm. The drones are haploid, but the worker bees are diploid. They're not exactly infertile either. They can lay unfertilized eggs, but they don't have the ability to mate, so they can't produce females. They can only produce males. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, so if I really wanted to go through it and debunk it in detail or whatever, I'd have to actually go through it and read it, right? So from what I saw skimming through it, it looked wrong, but what I said was, did I miss something or did JF? It sounds like, yes, I did miss something. I didn't really read it very carefully, so, but that doesn't mean I would agree with it or that it couldn't be debunked. It just means I wasn't interested in it, really. So the next thing I went into quite a bit of detail on, though, the robots.
So you want me to read that portion?
Yeah, go ahead.
The science fiction story is not a thought experiment in which certain premises are posited and then their implications explored. The story has no value as a prediction of the future or even as an exploration of possibilities. So this to me, I put, we already talked about this earlier, that I put that in the category of things that the theory doesn't live or die on, but are like a potential prediction of the theory. So I don't really know that a defense of it is needed if, since he's advertising it largely on this.
Well, we could treat it as a separate claim almost. What would the effects of large-scale genetic engineering be? That's an interesting thought experiment. But to carry it out as a thought experiment, you have to just start with the assumption, okay, we're going to have large-scale genetic engineering, and then think about the consequences, not try to get to the conclusion you want, which is what that story reads as, because he just keeps introducing ad hoc premises whenever he needs one to get to the conclusion that he wants.
Yeah, so it's a statement of probability. I don't really find that hypothetical very likely for us. I think it requires a lot of time, probably more time than we would have, as well as the contrived occurrences that you mentioned.
Well, there are a lot of conflations or confusions, equivocations, whatever in this. One of them is the equivocation between the medium of inheritance and agency. So he talks about robots with agency, with consciousness, exploiting humans in the sense that they are using the humans as servants. How do you get there from humans start using genetic engineering? Well, the way he gets there is by saying that, well, first you start using computers to store the genetic information. And somehow because of that, because we're using that technology, this somehow causes the computers to become self-replicating life forms because they're part of the cycle of human reproduction, right? That they then acquire their own biological purpose. So it's analogous to memes acquiring their own biological purpose, right? But then he sort of leaps, which, even up to that point, it's not entirely crazy. You could say that industrial civilization is, it's like memes co-evolving with genes, right? You could say the memes have their own biological purpose in a sense. Technology could be viewed in that way. But that does not mean that technology is then going to become conscious, sentient, develop agency and intelligence and develop an independent purpose from us.
Did he say in the book anything about the robots or the hard drives becoming sentient? Or
Yeah. So this is literally what he said. What you find on your planet is a robot populace busy exploiting some creatures that bear only the faintest physical resemblance to humans. These unfortunate humanoid creatures live in servility to their mechanical overlords, and though you attempt to provoke them into open revolt against their slave masters, no one listens.
yeah, so I could see how you could get that from that.
Well, I mean, that's that's literally what he said, right? And then he went through the story in all, kind of detail, and he kept adding in things. And I talked about this. There's some irony to it that he is actually assuming that a meme is sort of the deciding factor, that people decide that they want designer babies, and this meme spreads and all this stuff. But anyway, I think it's silly. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I criticized it, but I don't think. I talked about this a little bit. I'll just read what I said. I said, what would happen if we start using gene editing technology to select the genes of our children? Well, it would depend on who controls the technology. If the technology is state-controlled, there is a risk that the state would use the technology to breed a compliant population. If individuals select genes for their children, on the other hand, there could be a tragedy of the commons in which everyone competes to have superior children, and we end up with a surplus of beautiful geniuses and no one to pick up the garbage and flip the burgers. There is another possibility, however. We could collectively develop social rules about how the technology is used and use it in a way that benefits individuals and society as a whole. And I use an analogy to fire. When we started using fire, we became dependent on fire. But there aren't fire beings ruling over us, lashing us with fire whips, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't follow that, oh, well, now we're dependent on fire. We're dependent on cooking our food, so the pots and pans now rule over us with an iron fist or something. It's just dumb. We co-evolve with our technology. Yeah, so as we invent new technology, we're going to co-evolve with it if we maintain an advanced civilization long enough. But it just doesn't follow that technology is going to take this form of evil robots from a science fiction story.
Yeah, and they probably had to ask for specific, like if he has this Terminator like scenario.
Well, he describes it. You can read it. It's in the book. I mean, do you agree with it or disagree with it? I'm curious. What's your...
I don't know. I said earlier that I don't think that that's a likely pathway. Something like dysgenic evolution to excess and the resource shortage, and then follow on planetary disaster. Like that, I put my chips on that being the end of the story, more than TRP.
Okay, but I mean, supposing that the conditions were satisfied, like long-term prosperous civilization and genetic engineering, using computers to store information and then printing zygotes, all that stuff, would you then be able to get from that to evil robots ruling over us?
Yeah, no, I don't think that you would need some kind of like embodied robot. You could get something where it's just you have a set of organisms that look much different than they do right now, act much different than they do right now, and their relationship to the hard drive is just the way that they currently feel about sex, or they currently feel about having children, something like that.
Yeah, and I think that is actually, something like that in a very long-term scenario it's possible, and it's at least interesting as a thought experiment.
Yeah, so I don't know that it need be attended with the kind of Terminator scenario.
Yeah, but I think the Terminator scenario is necessary to sell the book.
It could, yeah, because I mean, I don't personally know if it's needed, but yeah, it's like I think, yeah, you said he uses the word overlord, something like that.
Yeah, slave masters. He said robot populace exploiting humanoid creatures. Yeah, it's pure science fiction.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I don't. I want to reiterate before we go through because the last part is just. I want to put forth sort of my skin and bones version of it and see
Okay.
if you.
Sure, I'll mute. I'll try not to interrupt, and I'll let you go.
Yeah. Well, actually, I want you to respond to each one, just so maybe I could revise it or see if it just doesn't work at all.
Okay.
So the first premise would be something like there exists genetic inheritance media. So I assume you're okay with that.
Yep.
All right. Second is a state of affairs can occur where a new potential genetic inheritance media appears in the environment.
Sure.
Okay. Third one. No, this is this one. Well, no, I'll let it stand on its own when I read it. When a new potential media appears in the environment, there are a set of affairs that need to occur in order for this new media to become the primary media of genetic inheritance.
So this is analogous to DNA assuming RNA was originally the medium.
Yeah, yeah. And also assuming like there's a couple pathways. I guess you could either say the new medium was created downstream of the old medium, or that it just appeared separately, phylogenetically separately from something else. That's also possible. Either way, it works the same. So, you're okay with that one?
Yeah. What was it again though? Just that another one can arise, or was there? Which one are we on now? 2 or 3?
The third premise: when a new potential media appears in the environment.
Oh, you were gonna say which problems it had to solve.
Yeah, I don't want to phrase them in the problem-solving way because I know that
Okay.
you take issue with
Sorry.
that,
I
so.
interrupted. Just read the third one again, and I'll shut up.
No problem. When a potential media appears in the environment, there are a set of affairs that need to occur in order for this new media to become the primary genetic inheritance media.
Well, I'm not so sure that like the way you're phrasing it is almost, I wouldn't say it's contradictory, but if a new medium emerges,
Well, it's a new potential medium for the.
potential medium, but it's not a medium until it is it's only a genetic medium, a medium of inheritance when it is carrying out that function,
This is
right?
just one that could be at some point in the future could be the primary media or I guess the media.
Okay, and we're talking about a molecular pathway, really. We're talking about a...
Yeah, yeah. So no, this isn't at the level of.
Right. It's just that primary, these terms assume that there is a primary and...
Well, also when it comes to the human genome, is it not appropriate to call DNA the primary?
Well, no, when we're talking about humans, sure, but when we're talking about the evolution of like DNA-based life or DNA as a storage medium, it's a little bit less accurate.
So what would is there a way you'd revise that to be more accurate?
Well, I mean, look, my view is that you don't really even need these terms at all. You don't really need to, because, like I said, there isn't like just one medium of inheritance. So it's not a special aspect, especially of an early cell. It's a special aspect for humans and for human evolution. But it wouldn't have been that like different from any other molecular pathway, how any other molecular pathway emerges. But anyway, whatever. I'll just say yes, let's go with this language, but it's it's kind of has a certain view baked into it. I mean, that's what I'll say.
All right. Well, I tried to unbake it as much as possible, so that's why
I know.
I wanted you to revise it in real time, but yeah, so we can, I guess, go into the fourth one. And you may have alluded to what I said at the outset, which is that I'm hoping that in this stripping, I'm actually not getting down to something that's just known about or uninteresting or doesn't really mean anything. So I want to find out if there's actually still something being said in this.
Substantive, sure.
Yeah. All right. So number 4, the new media must be able to incur mutations to its genetic material that are then carried on reliably in subsequent replicas of it.
It must be able to mutate, and then the mutations are heritable.
Yeah, reliably heritable. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, this is just a requirement for evolution, but yeah.
And then, so that would be the analog of what he would call the forgetfulness problem.
Well, I mean, okay, I'll just keep going.
Or maybe you don't even have to say incur mutations to its genetic material. It just has to incur change that's heritable, we'll say.
Yeah, there has to be some aspects of life forms that can be mutated, and those mutations are heritable for evolution to occur. So if something is playing this role, I mean, I don't really think there is such thing as a genetic medium. So that's maybe where this language bothers me. It's more like there's a medium for storing information.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
And that is the template for protein structure. But you don't have to switch the language to that. I'm just saying that whatever. It just kind of rubs me the wrong way. But go ahead. Let's give me the next one.
All right, fifth one. The new media must remain within an environment that allows for the continual replication of the system the media is a part of.
The medium must remain within an environment. Say that again. Environment that
must remain within an environment that allows for the continual replication of the system the media is a part of. So, like, DNA can't be taken out of its role in the system because nothing is going to happen. Is going to come of that.
Right. So a genetic medium is only part of a whole that replicates. That's what you're saying. Okay.
All right. So we're good on that.
Yep.
All right. 6. The new media must be so this is probably where we're gonna get into problems. The new media must be the exclusive locus of mutational change. If the new media has dependence of variation on pre-existing media, then the evolution of the form of the new media is bounded within the fitness space of the form of the pre-existing media.
Well, there's a lot of, I mean, that's pretty baked. There's a lot of stuff baked into that, but, I mean, it's not, I could sort of accept it. It's just that this is not really useful for talking about anything other than RNA and DNA, really. But, like, because here's the thing, a new medium of inheritance could emerge. In fact, for example, mitochondria replicate in a different way than chromosomal DNA, right? Like mitochondrial DNA replicates through mitochondrial replication, not through chromosomal replication, right? So it's not a different medium at a molecular level, but it's a different replicating unit that evolved. So, like, there's no law of biology that says you could only have one medium of inheritance or medium of replication or whatever. And so you're talking about like some earlier one. Well, I mean, something could emerge that replicates separately from something else. Like, it doesn't have to replace an earlier medium of inheritance. So, I mean, arguably, if there was RNA life and then it was replaced by DNA life, then DNA did replace RNA as a storage medium in all existing types of life that we know of, other than perhaps viruses, which are arguably not life anyway. But what you're describing is not a law, right? It's more of a specific description of a specific type of event in which one medium replaces another.
Yeah, that's I agree with that.
So it's not like one medium, a new medium couldn't emerge that doesn't replace another one.
Yeah, so I agree. I didn't pose it as a law. These are the states of affairs in which a new media appears, and then.
Well, I think you said something about exclusively. So can you read it again? Because I didn't get the whole thing.
Yeah, maybe that word's not shouldn't be placed there. The new media must be the exclusive locus of mutational change. If the media has dependence of variation on pre-existing media, then the evolution of the form of the new media is bounded by the old media. Okay,
so is mitochondrial, just to understand this, is mitochondrial DNA bounded by chromosomal DNA?
So I don't know enough about the specifics to answer that, but I'd probably say, based on the way you're posing it, no.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand the relationships you're talking about here, right? Like, because there are multiple replicating units, like there are multiple chunks of DNA that replicate within cells, chromosomes, obviously the cell as a whole, mitochondrial DNA. I think chloroplasts might have their own DNA. I'm not sure about that, but so yeah, I probably need to see it written down to parse it. I'm just not. I think I can just go with it as you said it, but so it sounds like what you're saying is that the new medium must determine the old one. Is that what you're saying? That for this, because you're talking about replacement, that it has to be that the new medium determines the old one, or that the old one disappears?
Well, just at this point, just that the old medium isn't playing a determining factor on the new medium. Yeah.
So that the old medium is not determining. So basically, the old medium is not just coding for the new thing.
Yeah.
But that's what you mean by determining factor.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I mean, like obviously, without RNA, no cell replicates.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no DNA can be replicated without RNA, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean, because you need proteins, and no proteins are getting copied without RNA, so no DNA would get copied without. So there is a complete dependency within the system. Every part of it depends on every other part, but not in this specific way that a mutation is transferred.
Correct.
All right, that's fine.
All right, and then the last one. Lastly, the new media must be selected in favor of over the pre-existing media. The pre-existing media over time take on a new relationship within the system where they're now acting as the writers and readers of the new media.
Well, again, that's not necessary.
I'm not stating that this will happen.
Well, but what is this a theory of then?
A theory of the replacement. Well, maybe in JF they'll just say where the phenotype becomes a genotype. They switch relationships.
There are other ways that new media could evolve.
Yeah, they can evolve and be in a state where they both rely on each other equally.
Right? Or they could be in a state where they both are sort of copied together as part of a system, but they store different information.
Yep. And that's this last part is just about it is speaking to the replacement of the old media. Right,
but my point is that this is not a theory of how, it's not like a general theory of how one medium replaces another medium, or how one medium and how a new medium evolves. It's really specifically based on the story of DNA and RNA. Like the things you're saying are not necessary for a new medium to emerge, right?
Could you help me out and like give an example of where these things wouldn't have to be true?
Well, I mean, arguably, you could say memes are a new medium of information that propagates from generation to generation, and they didn't replace DNA.
Yes, so I said that they've accomplished 3 of the states, but not the 4th one.
Okay, but that's why I'm asking what it's a theory of, right? Because it's not the theory of the evolution of a new storage medium, because there are other ways that storage medium could evolve than what you're describing. So what is it a theory of? Is it just a theory of the way DNA might have replaced RNA?
Well, yeah, that as well as...
As well as what else, though?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just having trouble understanding what's being asked.
Well, if you're saying... a theory of something would be like, here's a theory of the way objects move in gravitational fields, right? So it should apply to all objects moving through gravitational fields. A theory is a general claim or model of how things happen. So if this is a theory of how new storage media evolve, then I would say that it is not a correct theory, because storage media can evolve in other ways. If it's a description of how DNA might have evolved from RNA, or how the DNA as a storage medium might have evolved, then I would say it's a plausible description of that event. But it is not a general theory of how storage media evolve, because there are other ways they could evolve.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. It sounds fine to me that you could have a media that evolves to the point where it's existing in a system in which it has equal standing to the other media in the system because they all need each other.
Sure, but your theory would not describe that process, right?
What do you mean?
Well, because your theory specifically excludes that possibility.
No, it's a possibility in the so of the four occurrences that need to happen, when you get to the third one, that's the one that you're
Okay, need to happen for what?
for okay, how about for the new medium to then be the I won't say that the only, because that's not what I mean. The primary, you took issue with primary before, but the primary inheritance media on which the other media get their information.
So it's a theory of how a storage medium could completely replace another one. That's all it's a theory of. Is that correct? It's not a theory of how a storage medium could evolve, because that's more general. Like, for example, you couldn't say, well, if we start using a new storage medium, then these things will happen, or they could happen, or whatever. Like, it's not that if we start using another storage medium, like, say, hard drives for genetic information, that it will become the exclusive medium.
Oh yeah, it's not necessary that as soon as it arrives, it becomes the what did you just say, or that it replaces it?
Yeah, or that there's even any selective pressure in that direction at all, necessarily, right? It's not implied at all.
Yeah, it's not necessary.
But again, like, what is this supposed to be a theory of? I think that's the core thing here. Like, what is this a theory of?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay, well, I think this is the crux, because if you like, I think what JF is saying is this is the theory of how storage media evolve, and this is going to apply to DNA and RNA and to computer storage and DNA or whatever other. He has this whole theory of like layers, like the concept of a phenotypic revolution. He thinks this is a kind of special process that could occur in multiple cases and between different types of media. So he's making a general, or proposing a kind of general theory of the emergence, I guess you could say, of storage media, or what he calls replicators, because again, he thinks of them as the locus of purpose. And the whole point of the book is that if a new one emerges, then it becomes the locus of purpose. So now, the robots are where the purpose lies, and we're just slaves to the robots. That's the point of the whole thing. So I think what you've got there, and I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but I think what you've got there is really just a description of a possible way that DNA could have evolved as a storage medium and replaced RNA.
Okay. Yeah, and I think like the addition that JF would say, is that yes, it's a description of how DNA evolved and replaced RNA, and also that if there's in addition to it, that this is the path that all mediums have to go through.
Right. He would say that, and that would be false, right? So, yeah, because it's just not true. Because those things aren't necessary, like even that boiled down version of it is not necessary. You can easily imagine two different storage media storing different types of information. And in fact, in some sense, that is what happens, because, yeah, the centrioles contain information. It's not stored in nucleotide sequences. So, I think that's the catch, right? It's this, you got to think about what the theory is about, and then not make those leaps of logic.
All right. I think, yeah, because he's, there are examples of replicators, we'll call them, or media that JF will acknowledge, have solved or have undergone the first three states, and that's where they stop. Like, so we're in a replicator tango with them currently, is what he would say. And that, he'd give an example of like certain memes or maybe, culture in general.
Well, I don't think there's a replicator tango. I mean, this is just another bad metaphor. Memes and genes co-evolve. Biology and culture co-evolve. It's not a tango. Culture mutates. It has its own independent mutations. Those are selected in a way that's not dependent on genes. So you got selection going on in the memes, you got selection going on in the genes. I don't see the tango, I see coevolution. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the point of the theory really would be, or how it would have any relation to that. Like, I don't know, what stages did it go through? I mean, memes emerged as a new way of storing information, right? Culture, written language, these new storage media have emerged. Now we have computer hard drives. This is a new storage medium. And the information that's stored in that medium is evolving in its own way. And it's affecting us, and we're affecting it. Genes are affecting it. It's affecting genes. But that doesn't mean it's going to completely replace genes.
Yeah, I don't think he thinks it is necessary that the medium has to replace the other one.
No, but I think he's proposing this revolution as a kind of extra, outside of evolution, extra step that has some kind of explanatory power and predictive power, right? Because a theory, if you're proposing a theory, it should have those two things, right? So what does it explain and what does it predict?
All right. Well, I don't know if you want to, if we should wrap this up. It's been a little over 2 hours. Yeah,
we can end it here.
Yeah, and I'll say again, just briefly, that I didn't write these as refutations. They're sort of just the best I could do with it at the moment.
No, I think you gave it a good faith effort, and I appreciate the effort.
No problem. I was hoping that at the end of it I would be less confused, but I think I'm more confused. So, so I don't know that it was. I don't know, but I'm just also not feeling particularly sharp today. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, no worries.
I haven't eaten anything.
Okay, yeah. Well, so yeah, if you want to talk again, that's fine. Or if you want to talk about other stuff sometime, that would be cool.
I do enjoy. I did enjoy your books a lot, and there's stuff in there that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It's nice that somebody reads them.
I'm recommending them to one of my friends he went to college recently, and sort of got immediately 180'd into communism or socialism, and so it's nice to have a solid look at why those don't work. That doesn't rely on things like on economics. You can give like a game theoretical evolutionary perspective on why it doesn't work. I'm still much in my apprenticeship as a thinker, where I'm just trying to learn what's currently known. I'm not generating. I don't think I'm able to generate my own ideas right now. So I'm glad to have found you, because your books were very insightful, and I think there's two big things that I just wasn't convinced of, or was sort of agnostic about, that I was convinced by in your book. So the overpopulation problem, I was sort of in the same line of thinking as some of the IDW people, which is that the demographic transition theory is true, and that we would level off at 9 billion because people just decide not to reproduce anymore. So I was kind of under that same, and then the eugenics thing as well. Yeah, no, other than that, it's just all of it was just very good additional lines of reasoning for things like that took a game theory approach, and so I appreciated it a lot.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, I'm really glad you found it interesting. Yeah, I'll let you get your lunch, but yeah, I enjoyed this conversation. I apologize. I get a little bit irritated by some of these things. So I was not irritated with you. I just get sort of frustrated by some of these things. And so if I was a bit rude, I apologize. If I was a bit
no, it's fine. You sounded plenty restrained. It wasn't a JF discussion.
Well, that's true. There was no rage quitting. All right, cool. Anyway, it was good talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk again.
All right. Keep well.
All right, bye.